Okay, a very good afternoon, everyone. I hope all of you are doing well on this Sunday afternoon. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Ahmad Ubaidillah. I will be your moderator for today. Now, first and foremost, on behalf of Poetry Festival Singapore, we would like to thank you for taking some time out of your busy Sunday to join us for this program titled Ilham, Poetic Spirituality. I truly hope and believe that today's program will be beneficial for all of us in attendance. So before we begin, allow me to share with you the layout for today's program. The event will proceed as follows. First, we will have a brief welcoming speech by our program coordinator, Sadiq, who will also talk about the objectives of our program. And then afterwards, we will have our keynote speaker, Okky Madasari, to share her thoughts about with a speech titled "God is Not Dead, Poetry Saved Him." And we will then proceed to the presentations by our three panel speakers, Hilal, Noorasiken and Tauhid, who will share some insights on how spirituality is and has been expressed through unique ways in Malay poetry. So after the presentations by our speakers, we will hold a Q&A session where you can ask either verbally or through the chat. And we will then have a performance by our talented friend Ilya, who will be performing a song titled Ku Berpimpinkan Alif. Yeah, so do sit tight, have a cup of coffee beside you, maybe some cakes and pastries as you absorb some enlightening content by the speakers we have lined up today. Yeah. So now allow me to invite Sadiq Basha, a representative of the organizing committee of the PFS Malay chapter, to give some opening remarks. Yeah, Sadiq, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ubaid. Thank you all for joining us for today's event. As you may be aware, our program Ilham Poetic Spirituality seeks to investigate the close relationship between poetry and spirituality, specifically its various manifestations in Malay poetry. However, before we continue with our program, I would like to discuss further about the complex and multifaceted term spirituality. So today, spirituality is commonly understood as the state or quality of being dedicated to God, religion, spiritual things or values, especially in contrast with material or temporal ones. So in other words, when we think of today, people commonly associate spirituality loosely with religiosity. However, spirituality, like all words, has acquired multiple meanings over time. Furthermore, people often assign different meanings to the word depending on the circumstances and preoccupations. Put simply, spirituality actually entails much, much more. So it entails an awareness of sacred experiences, and beyond that, mysteries in religious encounters that are sometimes difficult to put into words. Hence, we do not want to make that mistake of conflating spirituality with religiosity or the commitment to a religion. And by that, I mean the kind of commitment which is limited to the mere recitation of prayers and ritualistic observances. So spiritual poems, therefore, are often written as a response to the quintessential questions of the human experience, whether it be about mortality, isolation, or even alienation. So these responses manifest themselves in many ways and attitudes, whether it be through hope, fear, yearning, love, or gratitude. With that said, while this program focuses on spiritual poems in the Malay Islamic tradition, we are not suggesting that spirituality is limited to any one single religious tradition. Oftentimes, similar spiritual expressions can be recognized in other faiths. So, for example, when I, as a Muslim, read a poem titled "Please Call Me by My True Names" by this Vietnamese Buddhist monk and activist, Thich Nhat Hanh, I found that we share a lot of common understanding and emphasis on non-judgmentalism. So that's something that I can relate as a Muslim. So Verily, spirituality frequently prompts individuals to look beyond themselves, their identities, and religious affiliations, or sometimes awaken their humanistic sensibilities towards injustices in society. That is why it should come to no surprise to see that spiritual poems often allude to today's major issues, such as the climate crisis, income inequality, or social injustices. So this begs the question, right? What then qualifies as spiritual poetry? So when searching for spirituality in poetry, it can be difficult to know where and how uh, to look. So part of the difficulty is that there is no such thing as an authentic or pure spirituality. In some instances, it could be transparent and clear. In others, it could be hidden within the works itself. Even works which at first glance appears secular. So TLDR, not everything written about or referring to religion necessarily relates to spirituality, and not everything written about the profane or the secular is devoid of spirituality. So with that, I hope that we can carry this spirit about spirituality as we ponder upon its multifaceted nature in the presentations to come. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Sadiq, for those opening remarks. You have certainly shared some interesting points, yeah, for us to reflect upon. All right. Moving on. So for this program, we are honored to have our friend Puan Okky Madasari as our keynote speaker. So allow me to share a brief introduction about her. Okky Madasari is a writer from Indonesia who has produced many novels and short stories, including Entrok, Pasung Jiwa, and Mariam. And through her works, Puan Okky Madasari raises social criticism and brings to light about the plight of the marginalized in Indonesian society. Some of her works have been translated into English, German, and Arabic. And currently, Puan Okky Madasari is pursuing her PhD at the Malay Studies Department of Singapore, focusing on censorship of literature in Indonesia. So without further ado, it's my honor to invite our keynote speaker, Puan Okky Madasari, to deliver her lecture titled God is Not Dead, Poetry Save Him, where she will explore the dynamic and ever-evolving inspiration and expression of poetry in the Nusantara. Puan Okky Madasari, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ubay. Thank you for the great introduction, Sadiq. I really agree with what Sadiq said, that when we're talking about spirituality, it's different with the religiosity. Nevertheless, portraying God or examine how God exists in our poetry is one of the best way to understand the dynamic of spirituality in our society. Spirituality has been a main topic of poetry in Nusantara since the very beginning until today. And when I choose this title, God is Not Dead. Maybe some of you already familiar that I borrow that word from Nietzsche. He said that God is dead or has dead, but I don't agree with him. I said that God is not dead, and we can see that God reborn or redefined through poetry from during in the since the era of 16th century until today, poet and writer try to redefine or try to find the best explanation of what God is. So I will start with this bit abstract, yeah. So the topic of this lecture is poetry and spirituality, and my lecture will explore the dynamic inspiration and expression of poetry in Nusantara, from Sufism to postmodernism, from Syair generation to TikTok generation. And I really believe that each generation has its own interpretation of poetry, God, and spirituality. I will start from this, of course, from the 16th century, which we believe that this is the pioneer of poetry in Nusantara, Hamzah Wansuri. And while he famous with his Sufism poetry, so we can learn how he expressed his spirituality and his definition of God. Hamzah Mansuri with wisdom try to portray God as close as possible. So we will familiar with the phrase like God is us, God is me, but we still recognize that God is creator, is our creator. God is the greatest spiritual being. God is something that beyond our imagination. God is the greatest of all. So what Hamzah Mansuri tried to capture through his poetry is to make us wondering or admiring or loving God in a very romantic way. He asks us to love our God. He offers us the portrait of God that close with us, that love human, and so human should love back God. So God from Hamzah Mansuri perspective is everything that we should love, we should admire, and I can say that the way Hamzah Mansuri defined God, it's still a very formalistic way. It's a very traditional definition that he used his poetry to worship God. And then from Hamzah Mansuri, we can move to Amir Hamzah. Amir Hamzah still considered as a Sufism, Sufi poet in Indonesia. He died young because of the revolution. So when Hamzah Mansuri is in the mid of 16th century, Amir century, 190 something. So we can see how he used the analogy of puppet as to describe human being. So we are human is a puppet, you are puppeter, to please God is puppeter and to please the puppeter. So everything is controlled by God. God is the puppeter. God is the greatest spiritual being, greatest energy, greatest creator. So we have to surrender to God. That what we can find from Hamzah Mansuri poetry. Well, Khairil Anwar, God is still the creator. God is still we still worship God because this poetry entitled Mosque at Mosque. And in this poetry, even though Khairil Anwar expressed his anger, expressed his disappointment, but he still needs God. God is something that maybe he expect to have. God is the one who he can rely on even when we are so disappointed or he is very mad. So it's still I think it's Khairil Anwar still see God in a very traditional way too. Same with the Hamzah Mansuri or Amir Hamzah. But the expression is different. While Hamzah Mansuri try to see God in a very loving way, asks us to love God. It's always in a very poetic and very beautiful way to express the relationship of human being and God. Khairil Anwar express his anger, his disappointment. But God is still something that we as a human being expect to do some help or to do some to to help us in our very suffer world. So, and then now we move to Rendra. In Rendra, he expressed that he doesn't believe on revolution of God. And what does he mean with the revolution of God is any movement or any revolution that only think or only aim to save human being, so human being can enter the heaven or to please God. So Rendra doesn't believe on that kind of revolution. See, he want us to think God as part of humanity. He want us to see God in every problem in our society. So God has nothing to do with the heaven or afterlife imagination or afterlife narration. God is something that embodied with the society's problem. So in this, in other poem, he also say that sin is not something that you have to fear of. We are sinner. We are sinner now, and so Rendra start to doubt what God is and how we see God. He wants to redefine our perspective on seeing God and spirituality. From that canon, I want to offer another perspective to see God and spirituality through the younger poem, the younger generation's poem. So this is all some poems I select from the my website omong-omong.com, and it's written by younger generation, Z generation, internet generation. The most interesting fact from this poem is they define God in very different way with the previous generation. It's very different with the Hamzah Mansuri, Amir Hamzah, Khairul Anwar, or even Rendra. Yes, Rendra want to criticize the definition of God and want to make God is more close with our humanity, our problem in society. But this generation offered other perspective compared to Rendra too. So it's very interesting. Like in this poem, sorry, I didn't translate this poem, but I hope you can understand too. Yeah, ketuhanan yang maha daring. Daring is Indonesian word that mean online. So this phrase means that God is now live in our online activity, and the most online God is our God. So God is the most online being. God is the Mahadari. The most online thing is God. This poem criticizes all our life in the digital life. And what God in this our digital life? Click viewer, the number of viewer, the number of our viewer in YouTube, the number of our follower, the number of AdSense advertisement that appear in our page, online page. That's our God now. So God is now a technology, and all capital, all interest that we can take from the technology. So in this poem, the young poet Muhammad Iqbal Firmansyah represent a young generation feeling of being ruled by a kind of supernatural being, much like the previous concept of gods in various aspects of life. So such a God now is technology, digital world, and social media. Daring is online, right? In other poem, he used the phrase of iman virtual. Iman is faith. So our faith now, even our faith now is virtual. in this poem, he described how people praying, do prayer in our Instagram, in our Twitter, and everything they write in social media. So it's very interesting part of his poem. He said that, "Oh God, I seek protection from you. I seek protection from godaan dunia maya." Is like all the digital life try to offer, yang penuh tipu daya, all the fake thing, all the glimpse of social media that it's not real. So he seek God protection from all the social media trap. So digitalism or social media is also evil supernatural being. So in this second poem by Muhammad Akmal Firmansyah, he shows that digital world also the source for evil and for devil. And then this is another poem by Nurul Latifah. Pelukan adalah siasat untuk tidak bertemu Tuhan. Ya. Hug, so is the way to avoid God. In this poem, Nurul want to portray God as something that also God something is so is fear, you know. God is at the some moment in our life we want to avoid God. God is not place to seek refuge. God is not being that help us. God is something that we are afraid of. God equals fear and death. So upon Nurul Latifah represent her fear of God, equaling it to death that has to be avoided. In other poem, mengapa Tuhan kita diam saja? Inas Pramuda question, there are so many problems in our life, there are so many problems in our society, there are injustice, there are poverty, but why God only keep silent and let all the problem happen? And this is very interesting phrase also. Tuhan mungkin tertawa. God only love. But why he only love? Apakah Tuhan pernah kecewa? Is God ever disappointed with this all condition? So Inas Pramuda questioning the position of God, whether God is also a disappointment. For Inas, well, he seems to believe in God, he and life, he gives to human being are just a disappointment. So it's maybe this is we cannot reject the fact that sometimes to this generation feel that God is not fulfill their expectation. God hasn't done something to save them, to make the society into betterment, or to help people who are in poverty, or to face injustice, etc. So God is also a disappointment. But in this poem, this is also very interesting, because in this poem, at the same time, our younger generation is also criticized the tendency, the trend of today's generation to avoid God. So there are so many younger generation, they read Marx, they read Nietzsche, they read all the postmodern thinker, and then they start to live religion, to live God. And then this poem, this young poet criticized that situation. He said that it's just hypocrisy. Well, you said that you don't believe God, but actually you always need God. You cannot avoid to say, Ya Allah, Ya Tuhan, God please help me, God please accompany me, God please help me to solve this problem. We cannot avoid that. So when you said that you are an atheist, you don't believe God, God is dead, God is opium, like Marx said. But at the same time, you cannot deny that you still God. You always say, God, please help me. Oh my God, God, please be here with me all the time. So it's also auto-criticism, or this is also the way of the young poet to say that we cannot escape from God. We still need them, and God is still living with us in this situation. Deep inside, they still have hope in God. So in this poem, Angga Pratamo saw hypocrisy about God among current generation. As much as they want to get rid of God in a time of fear, they will always want to return to Him. And this is English poem, so maybe you can understand it better with the translation. So what Adib Arkan over in his poem is, why God let me do this? He let me fall again and again. But it wasn't God, it was you, and tomorrow will come in a minute. So Adib want to say, whatever mess you create, there is always hope and God. At the end, this poem shows optimism and hope despite all problems he is in, refusing to just blame God, although it's clear he recognized its presence. Okay, sorry. So, God is not dead. That's what my thesis, my conclusion. Why? Because first, today's generation sees God and God's in everything. For them, there is not a single definition or imagination of God. God can be online thing. God can be viewer for your YouTube. God can be disappointment. God can anything. This is a very different definition compared to the Hamzah Mansuri, compared to the Amir Hamzah, or even Khairil Anwar and Rendra. God is a reflection of humanity, love, hope, but also fear and death. God is also feeling. God is a question rather than answer. So in contemporary poetry, we will never see one single definition of God or one answer on what is God and what spirituality is. Poetry is a way to find our own version of God. So it's really we can find how God and spirituality is more various right now, and this is show us that God is not dead. Rather, God now become anything. God is in everything, and that's, I think, what poetry has done for us. Poetry save God and save our imagination in redefining and seeking what God and spirituality is. I will conclude my lecture now, and maybe we can continue in other segment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Okky Madasari. Surely you have given us much food for thought in your lecture, especially regarding the role of poetry. That has always been important in our society, and I do think that poetry is not merely an aesthetic medium to express ideas and thoughts, but it is also a tool that should be used to empower those who are voiceless and marginalized in our society. It should be utilized to advocate positive change in our context. So now we will commence the main part of our program. We have our esteemed guest from Malaysia, Mr. Hilal Azman, who will give a presentation titled The Wind of Spirituality in Contemporary Malaysian Poem. So allow me to give a brief introduction about Mr. Hilal. Mr. Hilal Azman graduated with a bachelor's degree in human sciences, political sciences from the International Islamic University, Malaysia, IIUM in 2018. He's passionate about the arts and humanities. He's also currently an active member and writer for the journal Sang Pemula, a young people's collective whose discussions and writing center on issues of humanity, poverty, equality, gender, education, and literature. So without further ado, allow me to welcome Saudara Hilal to take the stage. Mr. Hilal, please. Thank you.
Right. Bismillah, Assalamualaikum, and afternoon. Right. Right. Firstly, thanks to Dr. Azhar, Puan Okky for your sharing, and then Saudara Sadiq and also Baidillah. Right. I have given around 50 minutes to share. Right. So let me share my screen. Okay, all right. So basically, for today's, I'm going to share my presentation is about entitled "The Wind of Spirituality in Contemporary Malaysia Poems." Right. So my name is Hilal Azman Bidris. So nice to meet all of you in this Sunday, all right, afternoon. So I really appreciate your times and your efforts. Right. Okay. Basically, in this session, I will share selected poems. These are three, for me, these are three great poets in Malaysia. Basically, there's many others, but this is what I'm select to share with you guys for today, right? So the first one is Rahimudin Zahari, Almarhum Rahimudin Zahari, and then we have the Nobel laureate A. Samad Said, and then Nahma Jamil, right? So the first one is Perjalanan Salik from Rahimudin Zahari. Okay, so this is the poem that have been written by Rahimudin Zahari, right? Basically, okay, maybe you guys can read about this poem, right? But what I'm going to share with you guys today is what is the gist or the values, the things that the writers want to deliver to us, right? And what is the things that we can highlight, we can interpret, and we can understand from the poem itself, right? So if we take a look on Perjalanan Salik, right? So Salik basically is like the one who are in the journey, right? So this is very symbolic kind of concept. It's the one who are in their journey, those who are keep searching for that there is not material things, more on spirituals. So, and it will different from each and others, right? Because everyone have their own we can say their own path, right? Their own experience, their own knowledge, right? And then their own experience of spiritual, right? So then I can relate what had been shared with by Puan Okky, right? How there are differences of definition of God, right? By many writers, right? Different setting of time, right? Okay, so what we want to highlight here is about the spiritual journey, right? The musafir of human being, right? So we can take a look in Perjalanan Salik. They said that Aku hambamu fakir yang dahagakan setitis air di lautan gurun. Aku berkelana dari huruf ke huruf, dari titik ke aksara, merenungi luas laut lumu and others, right? And then membaca dengan seluruh indera dan kedangkalan akalku, right? So this is what Rahimuddin want to highlight about his, or maybe if we read this poem, we also feel that is our own self, right? So we are in the journey, in spiritual journey, musafir, right? Musafir is not something that is physical, musafir from one places to another one places, right? But this is the musafir or the journey of spiritual, the inner self, right? And then also the emptiness of heart and no judgment, right, towards any God creatures, right? So this is the values that Rahimuddin want to share with us, right? So we as a human being, we try to not have any judgment, right, towards any God's creatures, right? Regardless of their races, regardless of their religion, regardless of their skin color and everything, right? And then this the interesting part, right, that I want to share is the we can say that the dynamics between suluk and sedar, right? Okay, suluk basically is a ritual practice, right? Suluk is more on ritual practice. Those who are practice like Sufism or have like something tarikat or anything, so they will practice like suluk. But suluk is very ritual things, right? So it's more on individual ritual things, all right? And the other side of it, or the other perspective that we want to share is sedar, right? Sedar is inner and intellect consciousness, right? So it's not all about only rituals, ibadah rituals or rituals thing. You performing something that can be seen by your eyes, right? But sedar is more on your inner, your heart, and your intellect consciousness, right? So these is the things that the spiritual things that have the high values, right? Sedar, right? That is very high. We can say that high in terms of consciousness, high level of consciousness. All right. So next one is sebaik damai atas sejadah. Right. So this one is written by A. Samad Said. Right. So I think most of you guys are already known A. Samad Said, Pak Samad. Right. Right. Pak Samad, one of the Nobel laureate from Malaysia. Right. So this is a spiritual poems, but full of social crises, social struggles, right? I might say that, right? So we can say that in this poem, even though the title is Atas Sejadah, sejadah is very like we use sejadah basically for prayer, very individual ritual kind of thing, right? But in this case, Pak Samad highlight about how he condemned corruptions, right? We can see here, berbaju ringgit bercapal roda juga tak manis berjanji bising. Jika hutang setengah negeri, apa bangganya janji diisi, right? So this is where Pak Samad try to connect and try to give meanings between the corruptions, right? And then more on mismanagement of country, and then more on politics or social problems, right? Based on his observations, yeah, he tried to you can say that to understand this in the context of spiritual, right? And then agar tak diulang dosa bangsa, moyang yang poya, cicit yang lara, right? So uh, on Sejadah, right? He's still thinking, he still ponder or contemplate about what is the struggle of society, right? Because normally when we say that spiritual is something like very individuals between me and God only, there is no rooms for others, right? So, but in this poem, Pak Samad include all, we can say all societies or all others person struggles or problem into in himself also, right? So and then the need for improvement and the better for future if right. So okay, then last one, right? Okay, still have time, right? The last one, right? Last one is Miskin, all right? Miskin by Nahma Jamil, all right? So if we just take a glance of this poem, Miskin, um, we can see that this poem is very like have kind of spiritual and very Islamic kind of things, right? But this is also the symbolic of miskin is not the material miskin, right? But more on how Nahma Jamil want to portray as we as human being is in the state of nothing, right? So no one is above another human or no one above another creatures, all right? And basically he also actually condemned the practice of like feudals or those who are uh, feel that they are very big or have like any specific positions above others, right? And interesting to looks is how Nahma Jamil make comparison between man and universe and the abstract values of Islamic belief, right? So he compared between man and universe, right? So we are very small. We doesn't have any things to be proud of, right? We are in the same, right? So and also um, human are created with love and compassionate from God, right? So because of we are being created with love and compassionate from God, then we need also to share the love and compassion between all of the creatures, right? So this is values that we can learn from this poem, right? And then also maybe this one is Miskin is very Nahma Jamil wrote in very specific kind of Islamic connotation, right? So he included Asmaul Husna, right, the name of gods, right, in the poems. For example, Wahidu Koha. Wahidu Koha is means that the one who are Kohar is the one who are uh, uh, the one who are administered all, for all, right? Those who are the greatest one, right? He is the greatest one, right? The only one, right? So these are the three selected poem that I want just to share, right? Basically, there is another poems that is very interesting, right? Basically, maybe next time we can have a share, right? By Kamala, right? By Kamala, right? But maybe next time we can share, right? So sorry. Okay. Right. So this I want just to end my presentation with something to ponder, something to contemplate, because like Puan Okky said, God is not only to be answered but to be questioned, right? Right. Spiritual is something like we need to ask, and also we need to think about it, right? So uh so are there many spiritually effective poems compared to explicit dakwah poems, for example, right? So and then because we have a lot, I don't know, maybe in the context of Malaysia, we have a lot of poems like anything regarding like Palestine and Rohingya and everything, and also explicit dawah poem, right? But there's quite lack of poems that have their own spiritual that are related to social, right? And then what about the spiritual poem relating to man and universe, ecology, right? So now all are talk about ecology, ecosystem, and everything, right? To the bigger humanity, right? Individualistic poem. And then after all, is it spiritual poems are well developed genre, right? So these the things that we need to contemplate and we need to ask ourselves, and maybe we can have a discussion after this. All right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saudara Hilal. I think the concepts of Musafir and Salik that you shared in particular stood out to me because based on some spiritual poems that I'm familiar with, the concept, excuse me, the concept of migration has always been figurative. Yeah, it does not only mean physical or geographical. The concept of migration actually means in spiritual poems to migrate to a place of better moral conscience and values. And just like what physical migration requires, those who wish to travel or migrate will always need support and knowledge of how they should carry it out. All right. So now we have our next speaker, Ms. Noorasiken who will give a presentation titled Spirituality in the Poems of Khairil Anwar and Narendra. So allow me to give a brief introduction about our next speaker. Ms. Noorasiken graduated from the Singapore University of Social Sciences, SUSS, with a Bachelor of Arts in Malay Language and Literature. And as an educator, she believes in the importance of nurturing critical reflection in order to develop a community of thinkers who will be able to contribute actively to society. Ms. Noorasiken was also awarded the Anugerah Guru Arif Budiman in 2019 and the Outstanding Youth in Education Award in 2022 by the Ministry of Education. So, without further ado, Saudari Noorasiken, please take the stage. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Saudara Ubaid. Okay, let me just share my screen. Yeah. Okay, very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on a Sunday afternoon with us. Okay, maybe let me just start off my sharing. So today, I'll be sharing about the readings on the poems of written by Khairil Anwar and W.S. Narendra, two very well-known poets from Indonesia. I'm actually quite nervous because our keynote speaker mentioned these two writers specifically. So, she set the bar high, and I hope I do justice to the great works done by these two great poets. Yeah. Okay, so maybe before I begin, I would like to start off my sharing with looking at the meaning of spirituality, which at the start of the session, actually, Saudara Sadiq actually mentioned, shared briefly spirituality, and I totally agree with him. Yeah. Right. So, sometimes when we mention about spirituality, the first thing that comes to our mind is always about religion, religiosity, faith, believing in God. But of course, spirituality is much, much broader than that. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to focus my sharing based on this quote, okay, by Dyson Cobb and Foreman. So the three key elements within the definition of spirituality is self, others, and God. Okay, so these are the three key elements. So there are also many other themes such as hope, connectedness, belief system, many more, and all of these are portrayed through the three key elements. So what do I mean by that? For example, one could relay and portray their hope to themselves, to their relationship with others, through their conversations and their faith in God. Right, so it's always through these three key elements. Okay, and definitely, of course, one of the best tools to display one's deep sense of spirituality is through poetry. Okay, so spirituality is not only referring to an institutionalized religion. Okay, I'm very sure we are aware of that by now. Okay, and it's definitely beyond that. Right, so before I go in depth about the poems written by Khairil Anwar and Narendra, let me start off maybe by a short introduction about our two poets, okay, and perhaps maybe provide a little bit of context about the time these poems were written. Okay, so let me start off first by sharing about Khairil Anwar. So he was born in Medan in the year 1922, where he studied until second year in a local junior high school, where he picked up some German and English. So for someone who did not manage to complete his, his education journey, right, he is actually very, very, actually he's highly intellectual and quite well read, right? Okay, so at the age of 18, about in 1940, he moved to Jakarta with his mother. And then it was in Jakarta at about the age, in the early 20s, it was when he first stepped into the field of Indonesian literature. Okay, that's just after the start of the Japanese occupation. Okay, so we can see here that the time of Khairil Anwar is actually during the turbulence period, where there is a lot of uncertainties, a lot of insecurities. And it is usually when there is a sense of crisis like this, right, that sparks the creativity, and this is when people start to look for an outlet to express and convey their thoughts, their hopes and their inspirations. Okay. So these are some descriptions of Khairil Anwar by A.Q., a Dutch scholar who specializes in Indonesian literature. Right, so he described the poems of Khairil Anwar as diversity. So Khairil Anwar was a very young man, very much in his prime. He was early 20s when he started writing his poems. He was perhaps maybe still not trying to find himself, finding the meaning behind life, behind his existence. And you can see that in his poems, which I will share with you in a while. Okay, so if you really to read his poems, you'll find that he's actually quite an intense person, I would say. The words that he chose to use in his poems are really quite intense. Right? But the messages behind his poems shows that he's actually quite intellectual. Right? His poems still remain relatable because of his diverse work. There's a lot of themes, and people can always find something that they can resonate well in the poems of Khairil Anwar. Okay, so this is Khairil Anwar. So let me now perhaps introduce you to W.S. Rendra. So Rendra was born in Surakarta in the year 1935, just a few years after Khairil Anwar. Okay, he was raised in a Roman Catholic household, and he was in fact a very devout Catholic. Okay, before from Khairil, Rendra pursued English literature in Gajah Mada University in Jogja before studying in the USA. And then in the 70s, he converted to Islam before he married a member of the Khaton in Jogja. Right, so these are some descriptions by Harry Eveling, an Australian scholar and translator who focuses on the work of Rendra. So he said that there's a lot of drama in the works of Rendra, maybe because he studied dramatic arts in the USA, and he said his poems are actually quite lengthy because he was telling stories about himself, about the world around him, and it's through these poems that you can really see his motives that he like to convey. Okay, so that's just a very, very brief description about the two writers. So let me start off with the first point that I wanted to focus on, which is the spiritual relationship between man and God. Okay, so here I chose two poems, one from each of the two poets here. So the first one is Malam by Khairil Anwar, or translated as The Voice of the Night. Okay, so this poem was written in 1943 during the war, when there were a lot of uncertainties. Yeah. So of course, at this point of time, people tend to look for the supreme being, right? Because they can no longer depend on others, right? So through this poem, we can see him trying to look for peace, asking if peace only exists to death, jadi kemana untuk damai dan reda, mati. Okay, so so he's also finding God, whether God can accept him. So the last few lines of his poem get, Ya Allah, badanku terbakar, segala samar, I've gone too far, can I come back? The door's been slammed shut. He's asking God if he can return, if God can accept him again. If you were to read on, Khairil Anwar, you'll be aware, of the way he lives his life, how he lives from one house to another, his relationship with women. So, this is an example of him finding God in a desperate time, looking, at his relationship with his creator. Yeah. Okay, so the next poem is by Rendra, the Masmur Mawar. So this was written in 1997 after his conversion to Islam. But through this poem, you can see his description or the concept of God. Okay, the concept of God in his eyes, which is very different from others. Okay, he started praising God as wonderful, sweet, full of love, and this was what actually Okky Madasari mentioned. He wants us to see God as part of humanity. Okay, so here he says that God is present everywhere, with the poor, with the people who have sinned, with the prostitute, with the hunger, the sick, and you can really see his deep beliefs in the concept of God and his relationship with his creator. Okay. So the next point that I would like to share is the spiritual relationship between man and the meaning of life. And the poem that I wanted to focus on is this poem titled The Masjid, or At the Mosque, or In the Mosque, written by Khairil Anwar in 1943. Okay, so at the mosque, in terms of uncertainty, right, people tend to look for peace at the place of worship. So that's why, when in Singapore, when the pandemic happened, when we closed the mosques, we closed the places of worship, people were very angry because, when they can't do anything else, when they want to look for peace, they go to the places of worship, but we closed it down. So it's the same for Khairul Anwar, when at the time in 1943, when things were very uncertain, that's the place where people will go to, to the mosque to look for peace, right? Okay, so he actually is interesting because he used the word berperang, right? Ini ruang gelanggang kami berperang. But it's not so much about people arguing or fighting, but perhaps maybe is the struggle with himself, right? So he like Puan Okky Madasari mentioned that he's actually very angry with God. You can see that in the tone and in the intensity of this poem. He is very angry, but there he is, fighting against maybe his own urges, the doubts that he's facing, the struggle to find the meaning behind life, the existence. Why is he there? Why is God leaving me behind, or why is God not doing anything to help me? Right? Okay, so you can really see that he's not really a religious person, or in Malay we call it warak, right? He's not a warak person, but through this poem you can actually sense his deep spirituality. He knows the existence of God, okay, as the divine, the one with deep understanding of things that happen. So into the poem you can see that spirituality is not just shown through actions, but sometimes it is more evident through the words and your thoughts, and how, just like how Khairul Anwar has portrayed his poem, right? Okay, so the third point, the spiritual relationship between men, hope and intensity to link with God, perhaps, right? Okay, so I chose these two poems that was equally intense, in their hope to link with God, okay, both by Khairul Anwar and as well as Yanda. So in usual prayers, as a Muslim, right, every time when we pray or when we do something, we always ask for God to forgive us, forgive our mistakes, forgive our sins. God put us in heaven. I want to go to heaven. But these two poets here, we can see in their poems, they are not asking for that. They are asking for God to see them, to look at them, to accept them for who they are. The intensity in the words that they've chosen, for example, in Kari's poem, he said that he wandered in strange lands, and here I am knocking at your door, I can't turn away. So here I am, God, what, can you look at me? Can you open the door for me? Okay, the same for Rendra. Rendra, I just took a snippet of it. It's actually a bit more longer than this. Okay, so he repeated the phrase, datanglah kau padaku. I'm here. Can you now come to me? Datanglah pula kau padaku. Right? So it's, can you come now towards me? So you can really sense, their hope for God, for their intensity to link up with God, right? So you can see the spiritual relationship in that sense. Okay, the fourth point would be the relationship between man and the concrete existence. So what exactly is concrete existence that I would like to focus on? Is just men and their relationship with their country, their nation. Okay, so there's no way we can talk about Khairul Anwar and we don't mention about hope and patriotism, right? So Khairul Anwar, he lived through the war. So the desire for independence, for Merdeka is very high and it's big. So Maju, the poem Maju was written in 1943 during the war. So this is why he's telling his country to move forward, to fight back. The other poem, Kawan Bekasi, was written in 1948 after the war. So he's speaking, on behalf of the lives lost during the war, to remind others that, the journey is not over, and it's up to them whether to determine where to go from here, whether the life loss is a waste or whether you should use that as a motivation to fight even harder to achieve Merdeka. Right, so from these two poems, you can see the relationship between Khairul and the love for his country, for his nation, and for his people to just bounce back up. Okay. And last but not least, which I find the most interesting actually, is the spiritual relationship between men and their conscience. Right? Okay. Conscience meaning looking at the plight of others. So here I just wanted to focus on two poems, both by Rendra, because Rendra actually, I would say, for a third party, he lives a very fulfilled life. He gets to finish his education, he gets to live overseas, he gets to study overseas, but perhaps it was his conscience that tugs at him. He still remembers about the plight of the people in his country, right? So he did not forget about that. So perhaps in his it was his conscience that he portrays in his poems, okay, to remind others about there are still people suffering in our country. Okay, so for example, the first poem here, Bersatulah Pelacur-Pelacur Kota Jakarta. So he's trying to get the positive of Jakarta to unite, to break away from that lifestyle, reminding them that it's now their turn to break free. So the second poem here, okay, so the second poem is about orang-orang miskin, the poor. Okay, so the second poem here, it's a reminder for the rest of us, to not forget about the poor, that they are all around us. And the last statement actually gets to me, juga berasal, orang-orang miskin juga berasal dari kemah Ibrahim. So, we all come from the same religion, for the Ibrahim faith. So, let's not forget about them. So it really shows, his relationship with his conscience, and try to remind others that, hey, you know what, there's still others who needs our help. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so here is actually quite evident, spiritual relationship that Rendra has with his conscience and how he pens it down in his poems. Okay, so maybe just a brief summary before I end my sharing. For the very first few poems that I shared, we can see, that Khairil Anwar was completely immersed in the chaotic Jakarta and the turbulence period, especially where everything was fluid and intermingled. But interestingly, I'm not sure whether it's consciously, whether he was aware or subconsciously, he was aware of the power of words and how he used that to relay his thoughts with great intensity, to relay his points and messages. Okay. The same with Rendra, so we can sense, his deep spirituality to his poems, about the plight of people in his country, and more evidently about his relationship with God, especially after his conversion to Islam. Okay, so let me just end off with this. Poetry is the most honest verbal expression, among any people at any time, any given situation. It comforts and as well as it challenges writers and readers alike. It is the best tool for you to convey and connect it to others, and poetry makes you a bit more mindful of the world around you. Right? So let me just end off with this quote. Poetry is a matter of life and not just a matter of words. And definitely life has no meaning without spirituality. And with that, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Saudari Noorasiken. The poems you have shared are surely powerful. I think to be able to derive spirituality from a variety of sources, especially social ones, as Rendra exemplified, is a powerful form of spirituality that will empower an individual. Yeah, so thank you for your sharing. All right, so next we have our last speaker, Saudara Tauhid, who will give a presentation titled Amir Hamza, Poetry is Spirituality. So allow me to give a brief introduction regarding Saudara Tauhid. Saudara Tauhid is an undergraduate in the National University of Singapore in the Department of Malay Studies. His passion for the Malay language and culture was sparked very early in his education journey, going way back in his primary school days. So having taken up Malay literature in his junior college stint, he has since found a unique connection to Malay poetry and strives to engage deeper to various genres. Yeah. So without further ado, allow me to welcome Saudara Tauhid. Saudara Tauhid, please, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Saudara Ubaid, for the introduction. Allow me to just share my slides. Okay, so a very good afternoon to everyone for being on board. And first and foremost, allow me to express my utmost gratitude to everyone for being part of this program. Special mention, of course, to the organizers, Dr. Azhar, Puan Okky, and the other esteemed presenters, Tuan Hilal and Cikgu Noorasiken, for the eye-opening presentations for the past hour or so. It is truly humbling and no less nerve-wracking to be sharing after their wonderful presentations. So anyways, in line with this whole theme of spirituality, my presentation is entitled Poetry in Spirituality, in which I will be discussing the works of Amir Hamza, specifically from these two books, Nyanyi Sunyi and Buah Rindu. So to kick off, just a quick introduction and biography of Amir Hamza, or Tengku Amir Hamza rather. He was born in 1911 into an aristocratic family of Langkat in North Sumatra, but unfortunately during the social revolution in 1946, he was killed and had died a tragic death at the early age of 35. So a little bit more about his life, or more specifically about his love life, not because it is the most interesting thing that everyone likes to talk about anyways, but really because it sets the context for the poems, which I will be discussing in the upcoming slides. So to put things short, in 1925, he fell in love with his cousin. 3 years later, went to Batavia for his education, only to return a year later to find his cousin, or his lover, or his ex-lover rather, had married another man. Right, and then subsequently he fell in love with a Javanese schoolmate when he moved to Solo, but things didn't actually turn out as planned, as he was ordered to marry the Sultan's daughter instead. Well, some things in life just don't go according to our plan anyways. So love life aside, moving on to the presentation proper, understanding spirituality in the wider sense, which includes a sense of connection to something other than ourselves. Right. This presentation will seek to discuss three different connections that is apparent from the works of Amir Hamza, namely the connection of humans to other humans, the connection of humans to God, and lastly, the connection of humans to nature. So starting off with the connection of humans to other humans, allow me to read the very first poem found in Buah Rindu entitled Cempaka. So Cempaka, aduhai bunga penglipur lara, tempat cinta duduk bersemayam. Sampaikan pelukku wahai kusuma pada adinda setiap malam. Or the English version of it, Cempaka, O flower of consolation, the place where love is enthroned. Convey my embrace, O blossom, to my beloved every night. So this first poem pictures a long-distance relationship, one where you are physically apart or far from each other, but yet desire so greatly to be close to each other every night. And now I'm particularly intrigued by the third line, sampaikan pelukku, or convey my embrace, in which it is as though the poet is hoping that his partner could actually feel his presence, or at the very least be reminded of him and his love. And, with every relationship, what more a long distance one, there certainly will be times where you miss your partner, right? And you long to be with him or her, even for a short time. So the repetition of the word asalkan, or in English, as long as, helps in illustrating that the poet is kind of, willing to do whatever it takes, just as long as they can be physically together. However, as his longing, as the feeling of missing his partner becomes too great, then he pours his emotion out to another person, just as us humans would do. So what I found interesting, right, was the fact that he was the person that he chose, to let out his feelings to, which was his mom. So if I may just show you the starting of this poem Buah Rindu, he mentions, Ibu, lihatlah anakmu muda belia. So, when reading his poem, it kind of hit me that when a connection that you feel that is too uncertain, right, an uncertain connection or a temporary one, it will bring you, or you would want to go to a certain or a definite or a permanent connection, which is in this case family. And specifically, he went to his mom, right? And such is spirituality, right? Knowing or acknowledging the diverse and multiple connections that we have with other individuals, and some of which, of course, the connections are less certain, while others are more certain, more definite, more permanent, such as family or such as his mom, as he had portrayed in this poem. So, at times, the agony of losing someone or being apart from someone is a little too great. And in the next poem, he actually talks about death and how death is a better solution than, having to go through this misery. And in this poem, he mentions, datanglah engkau wahai maut, lepaskan aku dari nestapa, or come to me, O death, release me from this agony. But, this sense of defeatism, or the sense of being defeated, is not a consistent, I would say it's not a recurring theme in all his other poems. So what he could possibly mean by death or maut in this poem, right, is actually to the sense of returning to the creator, but not in the literal sense. It is to have rather a mystical union or a greater sense and realization of his existence in our lives, which is what I'll be talking further in my next section. So the next few slides present the other examples of how Amir Hamza has pictured the connections between humans and other humans. But, for the lack of time and before Brother Sadiq nudges me, I shall proceed straight to the next section first. To talk about the human's connection to God or to our creator. So starting off with this poem, Tuhanku apatah kekal. In this poem, he returns to God and asks him regarding the reality of life, in which he asks, apakah tetap, or what is fixed? Apakah tak bersalin rupa, or what does not change? Apakah bakal sepanjang masa, or what is forever and eternal? So although it is not explicit, it kind of depicts a consciousness that the only one thing that remains and the only one thing that is eternal is none other than God. All right, so in other words, the love, the agony, the relationship that he's facing and on and whatnot will eventually come to an end one day. All right, and such is conveyed, in fact, more explicitly in another poem, in which he talks about how his love will fade away and that the reality is that he will one day return to the creator in the afterlife. But in the subsequent poems of Amir Hamza, this connection to the creator extends beyond just an intangible one. So in these poems, snippets that I got from Padamu Jua, from Hanya Satu, from Karana Kasihku, there's this common theme of him wanting a rather concrete connection to God and not just an internal one. All right, there's this desire for him to be physically close, or at the very least physically see the creator. Right? So in short, the poet, yes, he feels the connection to God, but at the same time, that internal connection is as though insufficient and he desires more from it, right? But at the same time, of course, he is aware of the importance of this internal connection with the creator, without which he realizes is the source of much suffering and hardships in life. So paying particular attention to the last two lines that I quote, air di atas mendidih keras, bumi di bawah menolak ke atas. Or in English, the water above presses me down, the earth pushes me up. So this line depicts kind of the suffocation when you lose the connection with God. You lose the connection to God, and it is as though the whole world, including nature, is kind of against you, right? So talking about nature, it brings me to transit nicely to my next section, to talk about humans' connection to nature. So before diving straight to his poems, I'll begin with something I quoted from Prof. Saleh Yapar, in which he mentions, as a poet, Amir was not only sensitive to his fellow humans, but also to nature. He honored the harmonious relationship or connectedness between man and nature. All right, so firstly, to talk about the closeness of humans to nature, let us first return to the very first poem in my presentation entitled Cempaka, right, in which this very flower is described to be hidden dalam sanggul, or hidden in the hair knot of his lover, or the hair bun of his lover. Right, so this Cempaka in another poem, imparts a pleasant fragrance, right? In other words, what I'm trying to say is that elements of nature can be so close to us, so much so that for some, you actually don it physically every day. It is that close to you, right? And that's not it. Nature is so connected to us that there is a possibility, as I quote from Amir Hamza, that kunang-kunang mengintai kita, or that the fireflies are peeping at us, right? So now in this poem, Kenang-Kenangan, the poet tries to recapture the beautiful moments or dating moments that he had, right? And in this recollection, he uses elements of nature to depict kind of a calm, tranquil environment, right? So in this poem, nature surrounds a joyful recollection. The same, however, can be said for the next one. Right, so in Buah Rindu Kedua, the last poem I'll be sharing for today, and so allow me to read it off, hopefully in a tone sentimental enough. Kicau murai tiada merdu pada beta bujang Melayu, himbau pungguk tiada merindu dalam telingaku seperti dahulu. Although he describes nature to be of little value to him now that he is grieving, I guess the very fact that he actually talks and acknowledges the fact that nature is present after all, it is clear that we are undeniably connected to nature after all, right? And so with that, I've come to my very last slide, just some concluding words. Poetry is not merely, as the previous speaker has mentioned, a collection of flowery, bombastic words in a paragraph. It certainly isn't, right? It goes beyond that. And the works of Amir Hamza, at least to me, relates very much to our own daily lives when he speaks of the connections that he has, right? Be it eternal or otherwise, there are moments where I feel that, I've been there before. I know what you mean, right? So his poems become a tool of communication. It speaks to us. The poems speak to us, and communication in itself is the very form of forming connections. So in other words, not only does the poetry portrays spirituality through the connections that we have with humans, with God, and with nature, but his works itself is something we can connect to. And this brings me back to the title of this presentation, Poetry is Spirituality. And with that said, of course, I must admit that should I have a deeper and a greater understanding of spirituality and the terms that are associated with it, I would have been able to give a more diverse interpretation of these poems, and for that I apologize. And I certainly strive to work on that in the future. With that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. I look forward to a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saudara Tauhid. It was really a very interesting presentation. Yes, and I do think that your tone was sentimental enough to end the session at a very at a very positive note. It also looks like it's going to rain here in Woodlands in a bit. So yes, very sentimental. All right. So thank you so much to not only to Tauhid but also to our three other speakers. Thank you for the enlightening insights regarding poetry in our Nusantara region. And so after such substantial sharings by our speaker today, I'm sure that our audience have some questions and thoughts that they would like to share. So perhaps if if you have any questions, you are welcome to post them either in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and present the questions verbally to our speakers. But of course, as the moderator, it's my responsibility to start the ball rolling for the Q&A session. So if the speakers are ready, I would like to ask one question actually to Saudara Hilal. Yeah, to Saudara Hilal. It's a very simple question. So before this, the three speakers have shared the pearls and values in spiritual poems that originate from our Nusantara. And I think those of us today are able to see the relevance of such spiritual poems. We can see that these works are a form of endeavor to achieve a deeper consciousness about not only God, but also about the fate of other people around us, to build a stronger conscience. But the question that I have right now is related to the young generation in our context here today. Yeah. So how can we draw the relevance of spiritual poems among the youths in our current context? Yeah. How can we draw the relevance of spiritual poems among the youths in our current context, where admittedly, there is a strong focus and consciousness about materialistic matters, and also in our current context, we are competing with other forms of engagement. Basically, we have social media, we have a lot of other things. Yeah. So how can we do so? How can we draw the relevance of spiritual poems for the young generation? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bai, for the questions. All right. It's a great question because I believe that basically everyone experiencing their own spiritual struggles, right? Especially those the young generations, right? Currently, right? And basically, as a global, we also experience many kind of things, right? The pandemic, COVID-19, and also the economic recessions, crisis, and everything, right? So basically, these are all that are play on us, right? So basically, for the youngsters or young generations, right? First thing is poems is not something very exclusive, right? So that's the first thing, because if we talk with young generation, they will have assumption that poems is or anything related to arts is literature is very rigid, formal, technical, and only will be left for those who are like have high educations or anything, right? And will dominate by those who are basically those who are old, right? Old person, right? So, but basically, it is a platform, or is an art of expression, like Saudara Tauhid shared. So it's about how you want to share your feelings, your emotions, your life, what you have experienced around you, what you have observed, right? So um, um, normally people use social medias for sharing what their experience, but in a very straightforward, right? Today I blah blah blah, today blah blah blah, right? So basically, and the interesting part is they share their experience or what they have been facing um is the interesting point is they have their own struggle actually, right? Basically, for example, like in the matters of uh, uh, we are in the matters of all people are want to get more likes or like what one Okky have shared, right? Views and everything. So there is the struggles or the things that or the new god that have been created, right, in online or digital world. So also so this is also things that are very near to them actually, right? So to make these spiritual poems relevance to the youngster is basically we need to bring all of this kazanah ataupun tradisi to them, but but with the new kind of interpretation, right? New kind of interpretations that very related to what have their experience, right? Their own life experience, right? So uh, we need to have like ulang baca, ulang tafsir, right? We have to relate all these poems that have their own high values to the youngsters, right? I think, yeah. There, I think, yeah, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much
Yeah.
for your answer, Saudara Hilal. Yeah, I do think that basically you are saying that we need a new kind of a language that the young generation will able to be relate to. Yeah, and I think poetry needs to be expressed in a language that is relevant for the current context. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. Okay, so next, since we are still in the presence of our keynote speaker, Puan Okky Madasari. Perhaps I would like to invite her. Perhaps she has some thoughts to share regarding the sharing and also present a question or two for the speakers also. Yeah, Puan Okky.
Yeah, yes, I will. I would like to comment what Hilal said about the how to make poetry more relevant to younger generation. So I did disagree with that view that we should make special way or we should find a way to make poetry relevant in the matter of language or the meaning, because I believe that the younger generation itself already define what kind of expression and what kind of poetry they will produce or they will use to express their feeling and their spirit. But the thing is now I'm Indonesian here, yeah, and then I presented already how the journey of the spirituality since the Hamzah Mansuri to the younger generation, the contemporary one. But I don't see that from Malaysia or from Singapore. So my question is, has you find or read the new poem from the younger generation that we can portray or we can reflect what actually what kind of spirituality or what kind definition of God to this generation want to offer? That's what we really need to know today. Thank you.
Thank you, Puan Okky. So perhaps this question can be taken by Puan Noorasiken or Saudara Tauhid. Basically, like if you're familiar, with poems from the younger generation, have you taken any? Have you noticed, any kind of unique expressions expressed by the younger generation about spirituality or God? Actually, perhaps Puan Noorasiken, as an educator, perhaps you have come across certain works from the younger generation, and also Tauhid being a youth himself, ripe at the age of 22. Yeah, yes, please do respond if you're able to.
I think personally for me, when I heard the sharing by Puan Okky just now when she shared several of the poems by our young writers today, I was rather it was something new lah for me, and it was something that it is new, and I feel that it is something that is kind of lacking to me. Probably could possibly be due to my lack of reading, of course. But at the same time, I feel that it is not something common. It's not something that we see common in the Singapore platform. Yeah, and I truly find it interesting when she shared, among others, actually took a picture of Iman virtual, right? It's something that is that resonates well in me, and I feel maybe in the Singapore platform, maybe possibly due to my lack of reading, I have not actually came across younger poets or younger writers talking about the theme of spirituality in their poems. I'm not sure if Cikgu Noorasiken have anything to add on that.
Okay, maybe as an educator, because I work with kids, so I think to me it's very much, I think, the issue of exposure. Okay, exposure to poetry. I think that there is lacking, I would say. In schools right now, especially so what they're exposed to are the traditional form of poems, right? Okay, the traditional form of poetry. So what they are aware of, is the pantun, is the syair, the sajak. But so it's just exposure. But perhaps what's lacking is getting them to try it, to express themselves. I think that there's something that perhaps we need to work on. Okay, and as well as perhaps, I don't know, maybe they do not see the relevance of maybe all this poetry in their life, so there is a lack of awareness in that sense, I would say. Yeah.
I see.
Ubaid, if I may, yeah.
So we have
say something, yeah.
Azhar here.
Yeah. Thank you, Puan Okky. I think you brought up a good point here. I mean, when you presented, the series of young Indonesian poet, reflecting upon spirituality, Of course, it struck, of course, are we Singaporean and Malaysian, the first thing was, well, do we have that type of cohort, I'm sure there are, but it is not like the case of, your experience, you yourself have this platform, you gather the young ones, and you mentor them, writing, and I think the pool of younger writers, poets coming into, I think in terms of Indonesia, the momentum in terms of quantity and quality is higher, for sure, right? I mean, by population proportion of self, right? I mean, I don't want to be apologetic about this, but also the Indonesian discourse, in Bahasa has moved into various domains, from postmodernism, to globalization, to critical theory, right? Many things. But the kind of things that Singaporean and Malaysian Malays, the kind of thing that they are exposed to, in terms in Bahasa Melayu, it is still limited into a certain domain, right? Unless they are one who, effectively bilingual, right? Able to transpose, things that they read in English and then they transpose it into Malay or into Bahasa Melayu or Bahasa Singapura, or what doesn't matter. That one is not quite widespread, it's still limited within circles, but I also observe, if I may add to this is where I think it's very interesting with our the younger generation. If I go to Indonesia, the younger one may not know the corpus, sometimes Rendra also they don't read, Khairul also they don't read, but they are very up to date with this thing. Whereas in Singapore and Malaysia, because of our training, we tend to read the old ones, Amir Hamzah, Rendra, Khairil Anwar, which still within our corpus, you see. So I think we can learn from each other. And as much as, I think next time, I think this Puan Okky has raised a very important one. Next time for next year, Ubaid and friends, we need to marshal all the young ones. We want to see what kind of poems they read. And then we invite Puan Okky again to assess, what kind of things they have been writing. Okay, that's just my thought for this. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah, I think a very interesting line of discussion that we have today. I think as Dr. Azhar mentioned, Sadiq and Liana, maybe something we can consider for next year's event, to give some stronger exposure for our young generation here in Singapore regarding a wider variety of poetry. All right. So unfortunately, that we only have a limited time for the Q&A session, and as you can see, if you can see among the gallery of speakers, we have an artist that is preparing to soothe our souls and hearts right now. So now we have a very a short performance by our talented in-house artist Muhammad Ilya, who will be performing a song titled Ku Berpimpinkan Alif. Yeah. So allow me to give a brief introduction also regarding Ilya. So Muhammad Ilya is pursuing Master of Arts with the Department of Malay Studies, National University of Singapore. As a cultural activist, he enjoys the intricacies of language, literature, and social philosophy. Ilya was also appointed as Sahabat Sastra by the Malay Language Council Singapore in 2021. So before the performance by Ilya, he will be sharing some details, some information regarding the song. Yeah. So Ilya, yes, please take the stage. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamualaikum everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, Ubed. Okay, thank you for the introduction. Okay, as Ubed said, I'm a student with the Department of Malay Studies. Okay, today I'll be, apart from my me studying in an NUS, I am also an activist, traditional Malay performing artist, okay, called DK Barat. Okay, in DK Barat, I can safely say that it falls under the musical genre of sung poetry, because the poetry that is written by the writers in DK Barat is usually accompanied by melodies and songs. So one of the song is actually the song that I picked for today, that resonates very strongly to the theme of spirituality. Okay, title Ku Berpimpinkan Alif. It was written by one of my good friend, Muzaffar Shah. Okay, for the theme, inilah pemimpinku. This is my leader. So he wrote about this poetry titled Ku Berpimpinkan Alif. Some background about this song. Okay, when I first heard it as a DK Barat piece, I think I was quite amazed by the poetry, by the things that he wants to share with us. So what we did was we sat down and we tried to commercialize this song, and fortunately I think this song got accepted and got some airtime in our local Malay radios. So today is the day lah. I'm trying to share with you guys. Okay, Ku Berpimpinkan Alif, I think is special for me because, like shared by Puan Okky, the presenters, spirituality is not only, I think, it's not only about the horizontal relationship between man and God. Okay, it's also about social piety, the famous principle in Islam, Hablum minallah and Hablum minan-nas. So I think Ku Berpimpinkan Alif is very relevant to those values. Spirituality needs knowledge. Spirituality is about understanding just leadership and governance. Spirituality is about spreading peace. So this is what the song is about. Mencari huruf di depanku yang bertongkat satu, yang berlidikan ilmu, kadang bersandar di dalam saf yang perlu. Jangan pergi dulu, jangan mati sahabatku. Ku sangkakan penghulu akan kekal selamanya. Alif di situ berdiri gagah, jauh ajal yang tiba. Ku perlukan penghulu menjaga atap rumahku, berkongsi air mata mengalir hingga ke hujung kuku, yang memberi salam di setiap pertemuanmu, yang bersyukur biar hanya sedetik lalu. Assalamualaikum, alhamdulillah, astaghfirullah, Allahu akbar. Assalamualaikum, alhamdulillah, astaghfirullah, Allahu akbar. Yang tunduk selesa di ruang ayat yang sempurna, memberi makna bicara mulut ke telinga. Ku sangkakan penghulu akan kekal selamanya. Ku perlukan penghulu menjaga atap rumahku, mengalir hingga ke ujung kuku. Ku mencari hulu di depanku, yang bertongkat satu, yang berlidikan ilmu, kadang bersandar di dalam saf yang penuh. Jangan pergi dulu. Innalillahi, alif yang bersifat rindu.
Okay, thank you so much again, Ilham, for that performance. Now, so before we officially end today's program, allow me to invite our program coordinator, Sadiq, once again to give the closing remarks. So, Sadiq.
I hope that everyone gained useful insights into spirituality in Malay poetry from the presentations that we had, because I know I did, and yeah, I'll definitely be looking into a lot of the poets that have been talked about. I'm a very bad consumer, and I'm still learning a lot. So let me just quickly wrap up today's program with maybe 2 points. I don't want to take any more of your time. So first and foremost, I hope today's presentation demonstrated how the region possesses a varied and diverse expression of spiritual life. So specifically, our presenters have highlighted how spiritual poetry covers more than just issues of religiosity and piety, and actually frequently alludes to a commitment to one's community, especially in terms of progress and betterment. So indeed, spiritual poetry often appears to be contradictory, right? Positioned on a continuum between world-affirming and world-denying. Yet each possesses the potential to be rich and fulfilling for individuals and communities. So it's important for us to recognize the region as a cultural zone in its own right. While we often look to the spiritual birthplace of our faiths and round up the usual suspects, whether it be Rumi or Tagore, we also need to recognize our own literary corpus and figures, regardless of their specific phase. Moreover, and the second point, our exploration of spirituality should not merely be restricted to poetry. I mean, it's important, but there are facets beyond poetry. So indeed, spirituality can even be found in architecture, calligraphy, or even the use of human voice as demonstrated by Ilya just now. All of these forms are cultural expressions that are part of a, again, continuum that began with what one might say the establishment of the region's first religious communities, and now it continues today as artists and the literati reinterprets the spirit and achievements of the past in new forms. Experimenting with new styles of calligraphy, or even, starting a popular punk rock band, but performing lyrics which are imbued with spirituality. Or as our guest speaker mentioned, just looking at TikToks or, social media, you'll see spirituality in it. So I hope that today's program not only introduce you to some of these figures and their works, but also encourage you to delve deeper into the region's rich poetic traditions and future. Yeah. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, Puan Okky. Yeah. Thanks for your good insights. Thank you, Hilal, Ashikin, and Tauhid. Yeah.